All right. Welcome, everybody, to Data Integrity in the Lab, Overcoming Challenges to Achieve Innovation. My name is Daniel Ayala. I'm the Chief Security and Trust Officer for Dotmatics. I'm about a 30-year security, privacy, and compliance professional. I've spent time in financial services, in media, in publishing, in libraries, higher education, and almost a decade in the pharmaceutical industry. I'm joined today by an outstanding panel of professionals who are going to help us better understand data integrity, its importance, and the impacts to research when it doesn't happen. So please welcome Irina Tarassova, Senior Data Officer at Charnwood Discovery, Marie Linvill, VP of Product Management at Lab Archives, and Trajen Head, Senior Product Manager at GraphPad. I'm going to let them all introduce themselves in just a minute. But first, I want to open with the idea that what is data discovery? What is data integrity? We each think of these things differently. So let's start by defining that term. And at the same time, if you could each introduce yourselves and provide that definition, that would be great. Irina, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Right. So my name is Irina Tarassova, and I'm a Senior Data Officer for Charnwood Discovery, which is a contract research organization. And I've been in this role since 2023. And before that, I was a Senior Research Chemist for the same organization. And as a Senior Data Officer, I'm responsible for scientific data management using Dotmatics R&D platform, as well as for user technical support, education and training to ensure that all our scientists are using the platform accordingly and efficiently. So for me, data integrity is the foundation of scientific research. It means that the data which is collected, recorded, analyzed, and reported are accurate, consistent, and reliable, and is maintained as such during the entire data lifecycle. And it ensures that the research results are trustworthy and ethical.
Wonderful. Thank you, Irina. Welcome and thanks for being here. Marie Linvill.
Hi, I'm Marie Linvill. I am VP of Product Management and Customer Experience for Lab Archives. I've been with Lab Archives for almost 10 years now, and prior to that worked for ProQuest, and I was involved with a service that was specifically about research funding and research collaboration. And prior to that, I've been in academic publishing. So I've been involved for quite some time in the processes, I should say, probably with regards to research solutions and supporting research endeavors and so forth. And in all of these different roles, the data integrity, although I think it's really now become much more of a greater focus and so forth along the lines, but it's always been an important thing. And so for me, and it's going to, when I heard Irina speak, you're going to hear some similar themes that for me, data integrity means assuring data is accurately recorded, maintained, and protected so that it can be trusted, especially the raw data. It's the basis of everything. So that's kind of it in a nut for me.
And I'm going to throw Marie's favorite phrase that she uses, that she shared with me right back, which is, good research starts with good housekeeping. It all starts with the data. Trajen, introduce yourself and then tell us your definition of data integrity.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Trajen Head, and as I said, I'm the Senior Product Manager for GraphPad at GraphPad for Prism. And I do a lot of customer interface. I do a lot of customer research, understanding what works, what doesn't, what you guys want to see in our software, making sure that we're delivering meaningful and valuable features and updates for you through our software to allow you to accomplish data visualization and analysis, which is kind of that downstream of after data collection, after data integrity, actually doing something with the data. But without data integrity, none of that is really all that meaningful. So to me, I take a very individual-centric view, excuse me, of data integrity. And you're going to hear, I think, between all of the panelists, a lot of similar themes. We've already talked about accuracy of data. The data has to reflect reality. You need to make sure that what you're recording, what you're storing, is the actual representation of your experiment. You need to have complete data. So it's not just the good data, right? It's not just the good results. It's all results, all of the data that you generate. Your data has to be transparent. You have to be able to see what's the lineage of the data, where did it come from, and storing it that way. And all of those kind of feed into making your data reproducible. And I think we'll probably get into that a little bit later.
Absolutely. And to attendees, if you're here in the live session, please feel free to submit questions using the Q&A panel at the bottom of the screen. Can't guarantee we'll have time to answer them, but we'd love to see them, and if they can help us drive the discussion, we'd love to have them. So please use that as you see things that raise questions along the way. So with that baseline, now let's add in the things in our respective industries that can and inevitably do go badly when the integrity of data that we use isn't guaranteed. Marie, you mentioned your work at ProQuest, you work in the academic research space. What happens in academic research and IRBs when data integrity goes amiss?
Well, it's impactful at so many different levels. So first of all, when any issue has been raised with regard to suspected data problem, something that's been brought to someone's awareness or attention by somebody in the institution, or what often happens is after there's publication and something's brought to attention. So right away, there's at the very least, there's a resource drain. The team that's overseeing data integrity research, data management, best practice, and so forth has to be focused on investigation rather than prevention. So there's that right away. There's a hit on productivity because usually the investigator involved has to provide evidence, and there's interruption of the workflow and so forth. So there's that goes on. And then you get into the publication retractions. Anyone who's followed Retraction Watch has seen that when that first started, they weren't sure that they were even going to have enough retractions to even start tracking this as a phenomenon, as a behavior. And there's unfortunately quite a lot. So there's that part of it. And then there's really a financial impact as well. There's loss of funding. There's an impact related to awards granted based on data that was later found to be inaccurate or falsified or whatever the case may be. So it's multi-layers, and it certainly is not something institutions like to have broadcast on the evening news. That's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Trajan.
Yeah, and I think my background strongly in academia is going to mirror what Marie was saying. And for me, I think just kind of putting a concrete example to some of these where, the loss of time, of effort, and of money. You imagine you're coming into a new lab, or you're inheriting a new project in your lab from someone who didn't have the best data integrity practices. You don't have complete records of their previous work. And now you're in charge of this project, but you're unable to actually carry on that work in a successful way because you're not able to reproduce the work they've done. You're not able to see the records that they had completely and carry that on. So you're going to consume reagents, you're going to consume materials, you're going to lose time, you're going to lose money, weeks, maybe months. And so that's not necessarily at the level of publication retraction, but that's another issue we have to worry about once data have been published. If those aren't reproducible, if those aren't complete, there's always the possibility that someone's going to call your work into question. And even at the bare minimum, you'll have to come back and repeat those experiments to show, well, yes, these experiments, they do work. Maybe the other lab that was trying to replicate them wasn't doing it quite right. So at the very least, you'll have to repeat the experiments. At the worst, publication retraction is something that can occur when data integrity is not respected. And then the last thing that I'll touch on, this is a true story. When I was working on my PhD, I was at the University of Miami, and we actually had to evacuate our lab due to an impending hurricane. So there's concepts about data integrity, like backing up your data and keeping it secure, that you don't always have control over. We had to, obviously protecting our instruments, protecting all of our computers. We're taking our laptops, we're taking our hard drives, we're pulling everything out and taking it with us when we evacuate. But there are situations where you don't have that much advance notice. And if your data aren't backed up, if your data are not secure, you lose that data and there's nothing you can do. And I think that is a big part of data integrity as well, is ensuring that you have that version, ensuring you have that backup.
Absolutely. Now, in shifting over to the commercial side, Irina, what any stories related to this or thoughts on what happens when it all
you can imagine it'll be quite limited and abstract. So essentially, in our case, the data is a crucial part of the service we provide to our customers. So you can imagine that compromising on data integrity, in worst case scenario, can potentially lead to reputational damage, financial losses, severe in relationships with the customers. And then considering it's a pretty small world and plenty of CROs that will really struggle retaining other customers' relationships and attracting new customers as well. I mean, if we're not going that devastatingly serious, that it will still impede the project progress, and it will affect the results in a very negative way, which can potentially lead to the project not being extended. Then essentially it will also lead to the loss of time and effort.
Yeah, and I'll extend that. I can extend that out, from the earliest drug discovery, earliest phases of drug discovery, all the way through until a product goes to market and beyond. It all depends upon the quality of that data, the integrity of that data from the first minute of research. And so everything is built upon that, which is why I love that phrase I raised earlier about, good research requires good housekeeping, but it also is built on it's a foundation. Provides a foundation that everything else is built on. And if you later realize that there's issues with early data or clinical trial data or somewhere along the way, it then affects everything that comes after it, which could result in patent issues. It could result in in 43s. It could result in having to pull a drug off the market. It could result in patient health and safety, patient safety, product advocacy issues. All of these things are rooted in good data integrity from the outset through the entire drug into the entire therapy life cycle. So what kind of things need to be in place to make us all more confident in the electronic storage of data, automated and both automated, manual, and at scale? There's been this move toward, Trajan, you made the mention about things that are stored locally. There's been a move toward more SaaS style, cloud style storage, both for greater scale, but also for offsite storage and that reliability. But what kind of things need to be in place to keep us all more confident when using those kind of services as it relates to the data itself, or the security, or any of the aspects that make you comfortable in using a type of system like that? Irina, why don't we start with you?
Well, I mean, trustworthy providers to start with. It's imperative to work with people whom you can rely on, and who can assure that you have a constant access to your data, and that it's stored, backed up, and then you are aware of what your provider is responsible for, and essentially obviously have other procedures to ensure that the data is backed up and stored separately as well, especially the raw data.
Good. And Irina, in our previous, yeah, good.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, essentially, did you want to mention anything?
I was going to say in one of the discussions we had previously, you had also, this is where you had also talked about the importance of training as well. Is that?
I mean, essentially, with regards to training, it quite often gets overlooked because people focus on what technology can provide, but also you have to realize that while technology is of immense help to speed up certain processes associated with data integrity, you also have to make sure that you have fostered a culture of compliance and accountability as well, and that all your employees are educated of what they're responsible for, and all your scientists are aware of what they're doing and why they're doing it with regards to data processes. So essentially that means that it has to be a cycle of continuous education and training where people are fully aware of why data integrity is important, what are the data management best practices, they're updated on the evolving regulations.
Marie, Trajan, what else would need to be in part of what else would need to be there? What else, when you're building products, do you think of that you put in order to build better trust in these systems, or make people comfortable using technology at scale for data storage like this?
Yeah, so I would definitely say that when you're talking about data storage, there's different levels of involvement. At the user is going to have different levels of access to the data itself. So in some cases, you need to have that strong access control, where the data is going to be stored long term. It's going to be available for analysis and visualization. There's a lot of different levels of information and access. And you need to make sure that those access control mechanisms are permissive enough to meet the needs of your specific group, but also restrictive enough to ensure that only the right person is getting access to the data. And I think that, Irina, your comment about training, it's extremely important. There's every different vendor of data storage, every different vendor that is providing some sort of data integrity solution is going to be slightly different. And so ensuring that as a member of an organization or a member of a lab, of a team, you're going to the management, the supervisors, those in charge of making those decisions and saying, how do we get more familiar with what's going on? How do we familiarize ourselves with these access controls, with the backup solutions that we have? Where are the data actually being, I gave you the example of the hurricane, where we have a potential catastrophic data loss. Where is the data backed up to? How do we ensure catastrophe recovery? Like what is the actual process for that? And then I think the last thing that I would mention is audit logs. So knowing what's being accessed, when and by whom is critically important.
Agreed.
I would just,
and as a security professional, that warms my heart. Go ahead, Marie.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm going to echo a lot of what Irina and Trajen said. They're just right on it in terms of any type of technology, starting with that. Irina was talking about trusting your vendor and so forth. And Trajen talked about preparing for disaster. Yeah, you have to always have that. What's the disaster recovery plan? What's in place? What's the time to recovery and so forth? So you definitely want to be looking at those sorts of things. The product, I mentioned this in my introduction, but at Lab Archives, one of our lead products is our electronic laboratory notebook, or ELN. And that's a very important part of the technology in terms of looking at how is that securing, how is that giving me that access control. That's extremely important. It's something Trajen said, and I know I've thought about this a lot, is the conflict or the struggle between, we want to lock it down, we want to make it so secure, but we want you to be able to do as many creative things and processes and document and work and allow the scientific process to continue to grow. So it's a definitely, there's a balance there as well when you're looking at technologies, how locked down it is, keep it secure, but allow the process to flow.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. All of that is on the technology side, but I want to pull away something you mentioned, Irina, about culture. I think as much as you have, there's a shared responsibility in all this. You can have technology and you can dump things into it, but it really is equally as much a piece of the culture of the organization, of your own organization that uses technology for this kind of thing, to assure or instill the pieces of data integrity, the pieces of good research practices, to instill the mindset of quality programs in there. So how does that culture matter versus the technology when I guess in your own experiences, when it comes to assuring data integrity in the research? Marie? And I apologize, Trajen had to step away for just a moment, but I believe he'll be back. So Marie, if you could kick us off on this one.
So, pardon me, the culture of there's two parts of data security, data integrity. One is the human component and one is the technology, or where are you putting the data. And the culture to me is really what is addressing that human component to this. There, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what types of tools you're using, you have humans interacting with them. And a culture that has a dedication to awareness, training, support, and it's not just having one person in the organization with a title like Irina's, it's really the shared responsibility across the board. Someone like Irina is the spearhead who's going to ensure people are doing the right thing, but it's everybody's responsibility. Then there's the technology, which can be extremely helpful, enabling doing the right thing. I mentioned the ELN, where we have automatic date and time stamping that cannot be altered and things like that. And that's important because that's going to support the human element, but the two go together. So the culture is, I feel that they are just as important, that culture and technology allows people understanding what is the right thing to do and technology that supports doing the right thing.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the one, we talk a lot about automation and AI in the world, but there's one thing that all of it lacks, and that is the gut. That's the gut feel, the person at the end of the process that looks and goes, something's not right here. And that's such a huge key piece that is embedded in culture of the organization, embedded in the culture of the people to want to do that, to understand their need to do that. And make that as a fail-safe check along the way as part of data integrity and built into processes. Irina, thoughts on culture?
Oh, I mean, essentially, sort of like I fully agree with Marie about the balance, and that both technology and the culture are equally important. I mean, essentially, sort of like the technology enables to increase the compliance, because if you provide the tools to ensure that all the data-related processes are streamlined, and it's much, much easier to do data quality checks and to import the data and to transform and analyze the data within the tools without wasting days and hours how it used to be, then essentially people are way more encouraged to actually use these solutions and learn more about them. But also they have to be encouraged to be responsible for their data and for all the data related processes, and to be able essentially to know whom to refer to or which source to refer to if they have any questions. And as well, if you support the training of your employees, then they will be able to recognize and report the issues, and that can influence the process of data management in a very beneficial way.
Without question. So I guess let's shift gears a little bit to I guess some of the things that might affect or impact people's desire or ability to affect good data integrity, either in process or in technology. In the academic space, there's this huge emphasis on research funding, publishing findings, publish or perish, ideally into high impact journals. Do these objectives introduce friction with data integrity best practices?
I'll jump in here. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that it can. I think that it can. I mean, they don't have to be at cross purposes, but there's definitely the investigators are under a great deal of pressure to secure that funding. It's a competitive environment, and funding agencies have been placing additional requirements that are burdensome, but are valuable, but they add even more burdens with regards to potentially how data is shared outside of the respective region, country, things like making sure that data is shared freely for discovery, yet protecting what might be intellectual property. So there's always there can be some conflicts along those lines. So it really goes back, I guess, really to that culture and the tools that we discussed to support that process, to be able to embrace things like accurate recording of all the data, but make sure even when it ended up in a failure, that if everything was well designed, but you didn't get the results you want, recording when things go wrong and making that part of the story and supporting that. It's not just about have these fabulous discoveries and articles, but supporting that process of it. So it really does go back to that training. And in the academic space, it's training at the very earliest phases for those up and coming researchers. It's got to be part of everything that they do, so that the motivation is there to do the best science, not necessarily the fastest.
And we're seeing funders add, you mentioned about additional requirements that are being placed by funders, but aren't we also seeing data integrity requirements being added to that list as well, especially in advance of some of the sharing requirements that are coming out? I'm speaking specifically to things coming out of NSF and NIH here in the United States. And I think there are parallels to that around the world. So I guess does that starts to cement the importance of it because of the integrity, because it is being placed in along with all the other requirements for good research.
Agreed. Yeah, it's definitely there. I think that's going to continue without a doubt for a lot of different reasons, but it's that's just additional, which is good because you think it's from the very top, from the funding. Again, speaking from the academic side, this is valuable to us. So it top down, it becomes the message of why this is so mission critical for all of us.
Right. And the only thing more important to academic research than publishing is continuing to get new funding for more publishing. So it's sort of fueling the whole cycle. Now, Irina, the corporate mind, the commercial mindset on research and publish, it's not the same. It's not the same as in the academic. How does this align? How do those kind of juxtapositions of volume and completion versus data integrity? How do those play out in the commercial world?
So essentially, you can imagine that for the commercial world, the situation is completely different because, I mean, for example, as a contract research organization, even if we get some exciting results for our customer, it's still not our data to publish. So worst case scenario, we go into patents or potentially papers after the patent tenure is complete. So the onus on us is on doing good research and adhering to data integrity best practices, because even generating positive results for us doesn't necessarily guarantee the contract extension with our customers. The situation, I mean, essentially there are multiple factors which affect the contract extension, which is the goal, as well as attracting new clients. It might be the case that essentially this phase of drug discovery is over and the next phase is taken in-house. So essentially it could be the case that even if you make a major breakthrough, then due to economic reasons is decided not to carry on because other projects take priority. So essentially, as long as you adhere to data integrity best practices, generate good data, share it with the customers accordingly, then your reputation is maintained and they'll come back to you for new exciting projects.
Great, thanks. I apologize. I've gotten word Trajan's had to leave on an emergency, so will not return. So we'll continue on, the three of us. So there's a human element to all this. The tech can only get us so far, but what kind of things do you expect from your technology to help reduce that human element of data integrity? The human prone error, or either malicious or unintentional corruption, things like that can play in. Irina, when you're looking at technology supplements to your processes, what kind of things are you demanding out of them that others can look for?
Well, essentially, if we are looking at all the different scenarios where the human error can affect the data integrity, then, I mean, first and foremost, you really have to have user authentication so that unauthorized users can't even access the platform and the system, and then tamper or with the data or even view the data. Then essentially the role-based or group-based user access is crucial for us as a CRO, because I mean, generally we don't get these demands, but it might be the case that we have a customer who would like us not to even share the research results with other people working in the organization. So essentially that could be easily implemented within the appropriate technological solution. And for the data quality, then you would like to have the data validation and verification tools, which can help with the human error upon data entry. Then also it would be nice to have some automation tools for data analysis and manipulation, because that's where there is creeping as well.
Great. Marie, when you're developing a product, what are you thinking about in terms of how to keep data safe on the way in and once it's in and on the way out? What kind of features do you look to put in place to make those things happen?
Well, I think we look at a variety of different things. Certainly, we're looking at, first and foremost, we want to make sure that data provenance is something that where did it start, who, when, those sorts of things, keeping track of all of that. I really like, Irina, what you had said, starting with authentication. How is authentication? How is access? So there's authentication. How do we know you are who you are? And are you accessing the things that you really have access to? So I mentioned previously that there's that challenge between balancing being hyper secure and really letting people get the job done. And finding ways, are we being too strict? What guardrails can we put around? You know, where data integrity is all about the who, the what, the when, the how, the why, the how. So if we have tools that take some burden off of some aspects of that, you know, date recording every single version, having a strong version control, fine-grained access control, strong authentication options, all those sorts of things where I don't have to worry about, did I write down the right date relative to this experiment that I ran, those sorts of things. If as much as possible, we think about how can we keep it safe, provide security, but keep flexibility. How can we provide guardrails that allow people to do the right thing that I mentioned before without it becoming so complicated or so throwing up so many barriers or impediments that it makes it almost difficult to use. And that's something that we always are looking at, Dan, in terms of striking that balance, but having that foundational security that we talked about in terms of authentication, access, and so forth.
Like security, this problem there's a user experience problem. There's a friction balance between usability and protection, and trying to find that middle ground is truly the holy grail. The other thing I'll add is around things, you know, looking at technology, or when building in technologies that keep and check that data at various points along its life cycle to make sure that it remains unchanged. So we've got the good, you know, Marie, you mentioned the good interfaces that prevent errors in entry. Now, as it's stored, as it's moved from place to place, being able to make sure that there's either, you know, some kind of checksum to make sure the data hasn't changed along the way, and then the logs that were mentioned earlier, that provenance, to be able to understand what was supposed to have happened and recreated. I think all those are really important pieces for you know, for that provenance of data, and are really being built into, you know, modern data storage solutions for research today. The one comment I'll say, the raw data is the source of truth, the data as it's entered. Other permutations, you know, there was a question in the chat about options and what are the primary options. I think they're most important to consider when choosing an ELN. And I think one of them is that the data is the data, and the permutations and the views are done non-destructively against that data. So you can always get back to that raw source of truth. Anything beyond that, you always need to get back to that core of the original data, and then be able to recreate the things that happen on top of it.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Definitely.
I just inadvertently dropped in a word for the next question we have around reproducibility. With recent changes in requirements by funding bodies and by regulators regarding reproducibility, how does reproducibility fit in alongside data integrity? Is it the same thing? You know, either of you, please feel free to you know, to jump in.
Well, I'll jump in, Irina.
Thank you.
I think it's very difficult to have reproducibility or replicability without data integrity. I know in one of our earlier conversations, Trajan had some really wonderful comments. I'm sorry he had to step away because I think it'd be great to hear, but he had talked about sometimes you can be doing all the right things in terms of documenting and so forth, but you have a poorly designed experiment. And so that can impact. And I think he did allude to that in one of his earlier statements. So having good data integrity is certainly foundational, but there's certainly other parts that come to play with reproducibility. So I think you can't have it without it, but you do have to have good science and good scientific design to complement the data integrity practices to lead to reproducibility and replicability.
Yeah, said slightly differently, there is such a thing as an unreproducible experiment that has nothing to do with data integrity.
Right.
Yeah. Good. Irina, thoughts on this, on reproducibility versus
actually,
integrity?
well, I fully agree. And essentially, I'd like to add that if you have to investigate on why your experiments are not reproducible and you can't get the same results, then keeping the data integrity best practices eliminates all these extra factors. And it will allow you to arrive to the conclusions much quicker. What was the reasoning behind it?
Yeah, the other piece about reproducibility, I think that's really important, but is a derivative of data integrity here is with a rise in focus on investigations into research, on foreign influence, on other items that require you to be able to reproduce an experiment as a way of confirming the data integrity. It's catch-22 because it requires good data integrity to be able to confirm that you have good data integrity. Can't get a loan because you can't get credit. Can't get credit because you can't get a loan. It's that circle.
Yeah.
But I think this is a rising effort, and so to play on the fidelity piece. The fidelity piece that you mentioned earlier, Marie. I think being able to track the actions that happen, not even just reproducing an experiment, but being able to reproduce the steps taken in the data to be able to bring the data from origin, the permutations, the calculations, the methods to understand how you got to this. This goes back to something Trajan said. You might get to the end and nobody ever knows how you got there. This is one of the pieces that also comes from offline systems or bespoke systems that are stored directly by researchers. You get an output. You don't know how it got there. You see it late, years later, but you don't understand how it got there and have no method of knowing how it got there. Having that recreatability definitely reinforces the validity and the trust in the data.
Right.
So all of that is rooted in having without good data integrity underneath it, none of that is possible. So speaking of reproducibility, I mentioned AI earlier as a buzzword, but also, there really is an appetite for the increased use of large language models of generative AI to analyze and manipulate data as a way to be more efficient in the lab, as a way to get to reasonable compounds, to get to reasonable results, or at least filter down to them more quickly and focus on things that are truly viable. But how does that appetite affect the overall reproducibility and integrity of the data, especially considering most ALMs and AIs are really point-in-time systems. As they're continually learning, it's really hard to get back to the state they were when they made the exact state they were when they made the particular analysis. Is AI still really not plausible in that realm, because in a realm that demands that kind of repeatability and integrity? Marie?
I think there's a trade-off. I think you've got to find the right balance of where the place is, what role this can have, and really take a very good look at and understanding what those technologies can do. There's the trade-off of speed and best practices. There may be a place where the AI, LLM can come in and be used to speed mechanical, repeatable tasks, things that it can learn that just introduce efficiencies, but it can't replace the person asking the research questions, the curiosity, the why, where is this, the decision, and so forth. Where do I go next? What do I try next? It's some of those sorts of things that are going to still come back to the individual scientist, the human aspect of this. So I think there's definitely a place for them, but they're not, I think, Dan, in one of our earlier discussions, if you could just delegate some of those decision-making responsibilities to AI and LM learning machines, where's the human, the need for the human and the experience in the whole process. And that's really where the scientist is so critical in discerning the information, utilizing and making the best choices about it.
Yeah. Irina, thoughts?
I mean, essentially, it's a very exciting field, and so it would be great to see how it keeps on developing in the upcoming years. But you also have to consider all the security information you're inputting, especially if you're considering using online systems. You can't really just use ChatGPT and say, oh, by the way, can you look at this particular target and then maybe propose some novel hits against it, especially if you work in a CRO, because at the end of the day, you enter something into ChatGPT and it might say things about encryption whatsoever, but it's still not safe and compromises the data security. So for CROs, essentially, you have to have on-prem solutions, and for that you have to have an entire team of people who train these models, maintain them, and the people actually still have to have an idea of which data was used for it, and they need to know other features, and they need to know more information about it, and they also need to be trained on how to use this particular model and how to interpret the results as well, because I mean it's a black box issue. The explainability is still not there. I mean, and reproducibility due to the degree of randomness is still an issue. You can definitely use them for particular things, but you also have to come at it with a critical mind. You have to know their limitations.
Yeah, without question. And something in our pre-work discussion that Trajan made here, and I'll convey in his absence as a counter to the negativity around AI and the use of it, and the regulatory impacts that are starting to show up. The FDA and EMA putting out some pretty concrete recommendations about ways to use LLMs in drug discovery research, actually at all phases of the research life cycle. His comment was, a good way to think about it is that you're using these systems to, in the same way you would ask a friend. You'll get some advice back from it, and you'll incorporate, as the PI or as a researcher, you will incorporate that into your research design, into your decision making. But you're not depending on the automated system to do that kind of thinking. It's a guide. It's a phone a friend. It's another thing. Now, I wouldn't be a security professional if I didn't say, before you go using any of these systems, especially public systems with proprietary research and information, please do contact your information security team. Please do contact your privacy team and your legal team to make sure that those are safe places to do so. Not every system protects data in the same way, to your point, Irina. So I want to close out. We're at the end of our time. I want to close out with a quick 2 things every attendee here can do to take back to their organization to improve data integrity efforts in their lab. I'll start out, and of course we'll bring the security and reliability angle to first. And this was mentioned earlier, I think, both by Trajan and by Irina, around change logs. Keep a journal of additions, changes, deletions of all your data so you can recreate research in case of corruption or the need for investigation. And the next is limiting update access, keeping track of who has access to what. If we do a lot with collaboration, a lot with data sharing, but there should only be a very limited number of people who have the rights to update that data, to create, to change, to delete, and likely never to delete, so that you can keep the fidelity. It just reduces the chance of either inadvertent or purposeful corruption or mistakes of that data. The Trajan talks about data integrity requiring involvement at the individual and organizational level. Things you should be prepared to handle for every experiment, including good experimental planning, proper data recording, and experimental documentation. And then things to discuss with your management, long-term storage solutions, access control, security, and training opportunities to stay current. Irina, we'll go to the next slide.
Sure, it can be tricky to advise because every organization has different levels of maturity regarding the data-related processes. But I mean, if we go back to the foundations, then before the start of a project, ensure that the documentation covering data requirements is created and shared, and the scientists of the project have it so that everyone's aware of the standard, as well as ensure that every scientist knows where to reference information regarding data management in the organization and how to recognize and report data integrity issues.
Great. Marie, close us out.
So I think we all have a theme going on here. So really establishing data integrity is a shared duty. It really, we keep talking about that, but it's so important to know that everyone in the organization, just like for data security, data integrity is the same thing. Ensuring everyone is adopting and adhering to clear protocols and processes. We talk about best practices and so forth. That's key. new tools and technologies. They still have to meet these checklist items. They still have to ensure that they're enhancing rather than compromising the data security, that they come with all the types of checks and balances that we discussed previously so that they can support the data integrity mission.
Great. Well, we are out of time. Thank you to everybody. I think we still have a couple of questions in the chat that we'll get back to offline. Thank you for attending. There's a QR code here if you want to get some more information about Dotmatics. But mostly I want to say thank you to Irina Tarassova, Senior Data Officer at Charnwood Discovery, Marie Linvill, VP of Product Management at Lab Archives, and Trajen Head, Senior Product Manager for GraphPad. I'm Dan Ayala. Thank you again for being here, and we look forward to seeing you again on another webinar soon.